What are the ramifications of the U.S. government's killing of 37-year-old American citizen Alex Pretti in Minneapolis? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Welcome to the Libertarian Angle, and welcome Richard Ebeling, my co-host for Libertarian Angle. Richard, good to see you again.
Good to be with you and our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, as everybody knows that watches the program, Richard's a professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, okay, for 36 years here at FFF, we've discussed the immigration issue, but we're going to discuss it again today because of what's going on there in Minneapolis, specifically the shooting, the killing of another person, in addition to the woman that was killed recently, Renee Nicole Good. They've killed a 37-year-old guy named Alex Pretti, which apparently it might be a turning point of some kind because there's so much outrage. I mean, both of these people are American citizens. They're not illegal immigrants. They're just regular people who are protesting ICE activity there. And, of course, the government immediately comes to his support. The agent that killed him, a Border Patrol agent that shot him, and said, the standard stuff ever since 9/11, they label the guy a terrorist, and that he was, bringing out his gun because the guy was armed, but they said, he was bringing out his gun. He came to the protest to kill government agents, all of which is pure lies, in which the videos that were taken on the cell phones established. I mean, it was just, they had the guy's gun in their possession when they just shot and killed him 10 times. They shot him in the back 10 times, apparently. Well, it's what I've been saying, Richard, for 36 years. I say it in my newest book that the case for open borders, a primer that's both in English and in Spanish on Amazon. This is the police state that comes with the system of immigration controls. Now, we've had immigration controls for all of our lives. As you know, I grew up on the border. I lived under this police state. This is not the first time that people have been killed by Border Patrol agents. It's just that it's always been on the borderlands. And so people in the rest of the country says, it's on the border. It's on the border. They don't need to worry about it. They don't need to concern themselves about it. Well, I concerned myself about it. I lived under that police state almost half my life. I saw it. I saw the Border Patrol. I didn't personally witness them killing somebody, but if we go back to, say, Bill Clinton's era, now Clinton's a Democrat, the military was there on the border. Okay, so this crisis is nothing new. It's what we've lived with for all of our lives. And they sent the military down there, Clinton did, and the military shot and killed an 18-year-old guy. His name was Esquivel Hernandez. He was tending goats, but they claimed later that, he had fired at them, and they shot and killed him. And killings have been a regular part of the borderlands. And you've got warrantless searches of ranches and farms. They would come onto our farm that was on the Rio Grande without a warrant, searching for illegal immigrants, and all with the idea of securing the border. I mean, this part of this process of this immigration control system, which is a socialist system, it's based on central planning. It creates the chaos, the crisis, which then is used to put the police state there. And people don't protest the police state on the border because they've just become accustomed to it. I mean, it's just part of life down there. The highway checkpoints, the roving Border Patrol checkpoints. But all of a sudden, you see that what Trump is doing is expanding the police state nationwide to other parts of the country. And I often said this, I've said this over the years, they have to do this if they're going to prevail with their goal of cleansing America of illegal immigrants. How else are they going to do it? Now, remember that during the Biden administration, they were saying, oh, Biden has open borders. Biden has open borders. It's ridiculous. Biden was deporting hundreds of thousands of people. In 2024 alone, it was like 270,000 people, something like that, 240,000. Well, when you're deporting that many people, that's not open borders. Open borders is there's no deportations at all. There's just free movements of goods, services, and people across borders. Obama, a Democrat, was called the deporter in chief. So why were they saying Biden was open borders? Well, because he was not enforcing this system as harshly as Trump is. And so people were coming in because they were circumventing the Border Patrol or ICE or whatever. And people were saying, oh, that's open borders. No, it's not. It's that you're not enforcing it as harshly, this system. You're enforcing it, but not as harshly. Trump is showing them what needs to be done to accomplish their goal. He's showing the advocates of immigration controls, including libertarian advocates of immigration controls. It's harsh. It's brutal. This is a brutal regime, Richard. Martin Luther King Jr., whose birthday we just celebrated, called the U.S. government the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. And it continues to be. That was back in 1967. Foreigners feel the ruthlessness and the brutality of this regime. But Americans, they sort of just have, taken the attitude, oh, it's just foreigners, that brutality and that ruthlessness. I don't need to worry about it. They're keeping me safe. But now we're seeing the fangs come out. And Trump is showing them, look, my wall wasn't enough. Remember all the controversy over the wall they were building in there? That was going to solve the problem. If you build a wall, they can't go over it or under it or whatever. Well, clearly it wasn't enough. And so when you see what's going on in Minneapolis or Los Angeles with troops there, ICE troops, and killing people, well, sometimes you got to crack eggs to make an omelet. But there's indifference to it. Notice there's no remorse of, okay, well, we really feel bad that these people were killed, Renee Good. There's no remorse at all. This is a brutal regime enforced by people who will follow orders. People that will kill without even thinking about it. I've often talked about these off-kilter people who something has triggered in them that are cause mass murderers here in this country. And I think it's the foreign policy of the U.S. It's based on this mass violence and killing that's bringing out the worst in these off-kilter people. I'm convinced that a lot of these off-kilter people have joined ICE and joined the Border Patrol and join the military. This gives them a chance to legally kill people. People that have this compulsion to kill, serial killers. I mean, what better place for a serial killer than to join ICE? But we're seeing it, Richard. And so you've got advocates of immigration control saying, but Jacob, I didn't intend this. You judge me by my good intentions. This comes with the system. If you want your system to work, this is what you have to do. Trump is showing that. If you don't want this, if you object to the harshness, like you say, well, I favor lightning, Jacob, but I oppose thunder, well, then you're back to Biden, where people are coming in and they're staying. Now, there's people that are saying, well, if they've been here, Jacob, they ought to be allowed to stay. Well, okay, well, then there's your incentive for people to keep illegally crossing the border. If you're going to let them stay, Trump is showing you, if we got to secure the border, we got to cleanse our society of these illegal immigrants. And so here we are, Richard, living under a police state. You and I have talked about this for 36 years. One of the first books we published at FFF when you were vice president of academic affairs in the 90s was The Case for Free Trade and Open Immigration. Every principle we outline there is applicable right here. What do you think?
Well, I will add to your forceful and insightful remarks about what America has become and is right now, with a slight twist on that. It shows the importance of free institutions. The media, before these events in Minneapolis took the front page, the headlines, had been giving a good deal of attention to the demonstrations and the government's reactive violence in Iran. an oppressive regime, both politically, theologically, certainly economically, had finally led tens of thousands of people on the streets of Iran to come out of their homes and forcefully demonstrate against the regime, the failures economically, the oppressiveness and corruption of their government. And what was the government's response? Two things. Well, the one that got people's most attention, violence. Estimates are maybe 5,000 people were killed by the government forces and their various roaming bands of thugs. But how did the government bring these demonstrations finally to a halt? Well, force, obviously. They shut down the internet. It was impossible for the people participating in these demonstrations to communicate with each other in the sense of giving each other reciprocal support, both in presence of events as well as psychologically, and to inform the rest of the world what was going on. Once the world became, in the communication sense, dark, it became very difficult for people to find out what was going on, what was the truth, and what the government was doing. We're not at that point in the United States, fortunately, and hopefully never will be. But given the statements that came out immediately when this fellow was shot the other day, and as you were saying, while he was down, unarmed, having his legally carried firearm had been taken from him, and then shot multiple times, seemingly in the back. Imagine that those phone videos that were taken had not been able to be taken, or if they had taken, the internet was shut down, and all that you knew were the statements that those government authorities made. Oh, this man showed up with a gun. He was wielding it in a way that threatened a massacre against law enforcement personnel from the federal government. We stopped a domestic terrorist from creating a chaos and a mass killing that would have been a shock and showed the evil of all those who would question these policies to keep America safe and cleansed from undesirables, certainly from abroad. What would we know? How could people be outraged? How could there be a response? It's the ability of people to communicate what they see by being able to videotape it and share it with others in their communities, and then on the internet, and then the news media playing those spliced together videos. And I don't mean spliced in a critical sense, but this angle from this person's camera, this person bought from this person's phone, et cetera, to be able to virtually see every instant of the episode as it played out in a matter of, a couple of minutes. That has forced the Trump administration to change its rhetoric. It has forced the border control head to be withdrawn from Minnesota. Now, what they're putting in, Homan as a substitute, is not much better. But in other words, they could not escape the reality of their own conduct because they were faced with backlash that still exists in the free institutions of what remains of a free society. That shows the importance of this, or the courts attempting to have injunctions. You can't bring in, you can't militarize the National Guard. You can't send in federal troops or agents wantonly into various cities like this. Now, the Trump administration has attempted to evade this. The Trump administration has tried to wiggle around it. But the fact that there is degrees of still an independent judiciary with its appeal system, the ability to have a free degree of communication by the citizenry among themselves and with the outlets that can spread that information, and the sense that people have a right to demonstrate, have a right to disagree, have a right to peacefully demonstrate, and have a right to even bear arms on their person, as long as it is not in an aggressive or violent manner. All of that has been made clear. Now, Minnesota is certainly not a bastion of either conservative or libertarian thinking, but this fellow had a legal gun with a right to carry, okay? in a state that I would have thought had banned that type of thing, like New York City bans most private ownership of guns. But this was viewed as legal. And the importance of a separation of powers, that the idea that there is an attempt by the state and local governments to speak up and speak against encroachments of the federal government. Everything that you said on the immigration issue has created this circumstance. The grown tree was in the seed. If you have such restrictions on the free movement of people, and the agency responsible for restricting it is to have the necessary authority to prohibit it, it leads to the type of conclusions that you were outlining absolutely positively. But what has enabled a feedback and a resistance and the need for the administration even partially to draw back from its actions? And that is the institutions of a free society. We should be very concerned not to lose them or see them degraded any further than they already have been.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. And you can see this in the result in how the police, ICE police and the Border Patrol police react when they see people with cell phones. They try to slap them out of their hands. It angers them that people are holding them to account.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's why they wear the masks. They don't want to be held to account. They don't want people to know, who they are. They want the omnipotent power. And you get this sense that I get the sense that their mindset is no different from the mindset of the Iranian thugs that are over there killing people. In other words, they would fit very well in with their Iranian counterparts. And they're thugs, Richard. You just get the feeling that they're official thugs that feel that they can get away with anything. I mean, to me, this really is what a police state is all about. I don't know if it's as bad as it is on the border. They're talking about going into people's homes without a warrant. Well, down on the border, like I told you, we lived on a farm. They would come onto our farm without a warrant. They never came into our home for some reason, but I think they had the authority to. But they had the authority to come into our farm, and all the ranches, not just on the river. Our farm was on the river, but tens miles away from the border. They called it the functional equivalent of the border. They had highway checkpoints. Everybody's just used to this. And what I find just fascinating is that there's a way out of this. See, there's a way out of this police state, but all too many people think the way out is abolish ICE. You see the signs, abolish ICE. Or have a better plan. I mean, there's always this conception. We need reform. We clearly need reform, Richard, comprehensive immigration reform, as if there's some kind of ideal, benign, gentle system that can come into existence and everything works out. No illegal immigrants. Everybody stands in line for 8 years to get their visa, and it's a pipe dream. It's just an absolute pipe dream. There is no such reform. You've got, as long as you have this socialist system and you have it excluding multitudes of people that want to come in, you're going to have a black market and you're going to have death, whether it's death from these killings of protesters or killings of a guy tending his goats or a killing of a person that's transporting illegal immigrants, or people dying in the backs of 18-wheelers, or of asphyxiation, or dying of drowning in the Rio Grande, especially after getting cut up by concertina wire, dying from falling off this Berlin Wall they built down there. Death is part of this system. It's a police state system. And what's really difficult for me to understand is why more people don't recognize that what you and I have been suggesting for 36 years is the solution. When you talk about open borders, it's just the system we have domestically. Look how well it works domestically. You don't see this police state along the state borders. You don't see border walls. You don't see people getting shot enforcing state border controls. It's a harmonious system. It's a fluid system. It recognizes people's right to pursue happiness, something we're going to be celebrating on the 4th of July and the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. It's a system that works. It's a system that's moral. It's consistent with free market principles, which is our heritage. It's consistent with religious principles of thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. You don't have all this chaos and crisis and death and suffering. What is it that prevents people from recognizing that, my gosh, there really is a simple solution to this, and that's to restore the founding principle of open borders on which the country was founded. Remember, in the Declaration of Independence that we're going to be celebrating, the anniversary celebrating this 4th of July, one of the reasons the colonists were revolting against their own government was the restrictions on travel, of migration into the colonies that King George is putting on there. But if people, I'm hoping, Richard, that this might serve as a catalyst for a lot of Americans, not just to say we need reform, the classic thing, the system needs reform, but to raise their vision to a higher level and say, let's go with freedom ideas. And that idea is the free movements of goods, services, and people. The case for free trade and open immigration, as you and I co-edited that book many, many years ago.
Well, I think that part of the explanation for this mindset is the perverse and pervasive influence of the ideology of nationalism. And this is the idea that you belong to a tribe. And it's called Germany, it's called Britain, it's called France, it's called Sweden, it's called Italy, it's called Japan, it's called South Korea, it's called China, it's called the United States, it's called Canada. And that the educational system and the cultural attitudes fostered and complementary to that educational system has generated the idea that the core entity of human relationships is determined by and defined by the nation state. That is the community to which you belong and is the inviolable community. Now, you were saying that this doesn't happen between states, but that's because we're viewed as belonging to the same tribe. Even though Americans today are white, black, Asian, mixes in between, but you're defined as an American. So Americans can go anywhere they want within the tribal territory. But another nation state and those born and living in another nation state are not members of the same tribe. Now imagine, as you were suggesting, these border restrictions were put together between the states. Now, what would be happening right now in California if there were border restrictions both leaving as well as entering states? First of all, I would imagine that the governor of California would be appealing to the state legislature that, the citizens of California owe their state their life and their fortune. What would they be if they had not been educated in, nurtured, taken care of, and given a sense of identity as Californians? So as I raise income tax and place special one-time only wealth taxes on the rich, I must have the authority to prevent them from leaving California. There have to be immigration restrictions. We have to keep them in because they owe their fellow Californians who gave them the opportunity to make those extra dollars, which is only fair that they give back through these wealth taxes and these higher income taxes. And how dare they try to leave? That was the Soviet view of things. Now, on the other hand, where would they be going? California. Florida, Texas, the Carolinas. South Carolina is a big state attracting people from New York, Massachusetts, California. Oh, they're all flooding into Texas. We can't allow this. What about our Texans' right to a living and a living wage? They're going to flood the labor market. Now, we can give special residency visas to those who will invest a certain amount of money in Texas. But the ordinary Californian, the riffraff who'd want to come in here and then live at the Texas citizens' expense. I'm sorry. We have to legitimately have that borderline to keep out those undesirables from other states within the Union. Now, people consider this a sarcasm, consider it ludicrous, a reductio ad absurdum, but it is not. Once you have this idea of what defines you as a member of a particular tribe within a geographical area, and that this tribe has, in a sense, cultural, political, and social oversight and even ownership of you and all of you that is involved in it, then that naturally follows. And if you could restrict borders between California and Texas, because they now had degrees of sovereignty, including Texas history, California history, what it means to be a Texan and a Californian. You're supposed to be proud of it, by golly. Well, we're even going to have our own state anthems that will be played at the beginning of sports events. And you better do a Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of California, or you're going to be considered, someone who's unpatriotic. Okay, all that would be the same. And we would consider that ludicrous. But you see, that's the logical extension. If you're concerned about undesirables coming to Texas or Florida or some other state from California or Massachusetts and New Jersey or New York, then, and if these states could do this, why would you expect anything different than what's being done globally between nation states?
No, you make some good points. In fact, I think that prior to the Civil War, Americans really viewed their states as their homes, the way we view America. I mean, that's why a lot of them stayed in the Confederacy. There was one Supreme Court justice, I think his name is Campbell, that said he resigned from the Supreme Court to return to his home in Louisiana.
Right.
They considered the home there. I think that it's important to point out that when we talk about open borders, we're talking about people simply coming here, but not necessarily being American citizens. I mean, imagine some people that just come here on vacation. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Somebody comes here on vacation. Let's say it's a 3-month vacation. The whole world. Borders are open during the summertime. Well, okay, I don't think people get all bent out of shape over that possibility that people were here for 3 months. They don't change their citizenship. They retain their citizenship, and they go back, okay? Well, all we're talking about is open borders is the same principle. They may stay indefinitely here. I know a woman that is a Japanese citizen. She's been here 30 years. So what? I mean, they could make as stringent as they want how to become a citizen, naturalized citizen. I don't care about that. But everybody that comes in, I don't think they come here to become a citizen. They can apply for citizenship. They come here to seek a better way of life economically, usually, and not to vote. Because one vote's not going to make that much of a difference, but it makes a big difference when their standard of living when they come to the United States. So we're not talking about people changing their citizenship. And most of the time, kids that are born here, by the time they get 18, they're absorbed into the American society. They're American citizens. They may be bilingual, but they're as Americans as everybody else. And your thought experiment I think is very good, because you could imagine, when I was living in Texas, when I first met you, there was this financial crisis on Wall Street that caused a lot of New Yorkers to flood into Dallas. And there were signs all over Dallas that said, "We don't care how you did it in New York." Because New Yorkers are very arrogant people. This is how you should do things here. Well, no, you come into Texas and this is how we do things here in Texas. But you could imagine Texas under a controlled border system saying, every Californian is going to flood into Austin, because there were a lot of Californians flooding into Austin. We need immigration controls. Well, no, because all of a sudden the price mechanism starts operating. Things start getting more expensive in Austin. So Californians look to South Carolina or to Georgia or whatever, things are less expensive. This is the great regulator. You don't need government to be regulating the flows of people. And this is where that faith in free markets come in. That you've got to have an understanding and a faith in the free market process to understand that opening the border simply means people are going to be moving back and forth, back and forth. You don't even know who a citizen is. When you go into McDonald's, and you see somebody speaking Spanish back there, do you go back there and say, well, I want to see your green card. Are you an American citizen or whatever? Nobody cares. The only time people would care about whether a particular person with whom they're interacting is a citizen is on voting day. But otherwise, Richard, it's just a confluence of people back and forth that like we have today. How many times do people go and say, I better go check that person's citizenship because they're speaking a foreign language here? Never, except ICE and the Border Patrol.
You know, you mentioned, an influx of New Yorkers into Texas. When I moved to Dallas in 1984, my car had New York license plates. And I've only been in Dallas for a few days, and I'm at a traffic light, and there's a car in front of me at the traffic light. And I look down at his bumper, and he has a bumper sticker. If you love New York, get out of town. I said, "Oh, so that's the Texas version of the welcome wagon." I see. And there was even there was a commercial that had the same thing about New Yorkers. It was for a sort of like a hot sauce called picante hot sauce. And so you have these cowboys around the fire, like doing the roundup, right? And they're at the fire, and one guy says, try this picante sauce. And one of the other wranglers looks at it and says, New Jersey? This was made in New Jersey? Get a rope. No, but the thing is that it is true that before the Civil War, Americans felt a deep, close identity with their state government. In fact, linguistically, before the Civil War, you referred to the United States in the following way. The United States are. That is, it's a plural. It is a compact among sovereign states that had set up the constitutional rules, no impingements of movement of people or goods between the state borders and so on. But you felt a loyalty to your state. You viewed yourself as a Tennessean, right? That's how Davy Crockett viewed himself as a Tennessean. But at the same time, it didn't involve any of this nationalistic nonsense. But then after the Civil War, and basically because the concept of states' rights had been so darkened and blackened by the secession movement and its identity with the preservation of slavery, and now the concentration of power in Washington, already coming out of Lincoln's policies following the Civil War, that linguistically now, if you read books from that time, it no longer is the United States are, the United States is.
Yeah, no, it's true.
And as a consequence now, the identity is that you're an American. And a Canadian is a foreigner, a Mexican is a foreigner, an Englishman is a foreigner. And they're not the same as our tribe. It's that nationalist tribalism that is the heart of a lot of this.
Well, and I think it's important to point out that with all the criticism Trump is getting, he really is following what he said he was going to do in a logical way. He says, we need to secure the borders. Well, that doesn't just mean building the wall at the border or putting the troops at the border.
Right.
It means that when people circumvent those controls and make it into Minnesota, we got to go ferret out those people.
Right.
Because if we don't, that'll just encourage more people to circumvent and make it to Minnesota.
Right.
So there's a logic to what he's doing.
Right.
And then how do you ferret them out? Well, you go into people's homes, you barge into homes, you get snitches, you stop people walking down the street that are dark-skinned. Okay, then what happens when people start protesting? They're interfering. Right. They're obstructing justice. So there's a logic that is rooted in the original border control system. And if you don't want that logic to be pursued, then you're back to Biden's approach of, well, let's just enforce it on some of the people. Let's have it lax enforcement on people that are already here. Well, so Trump's just being logical. But the real essence of this, Richard, it's like when I was a kid growing up on that farm and on the Rio Grande, my dad taught me if you want to get rid of a weed, you got to pull it out by its root. You can't just trim the branches. Forget the reform claptrap that we hear. That people need to analyze what is the root of this problem. Why the chaos? And I say because it's socialism that brings what Ludwig von Mises called planned chaos to the border. That's why we have the crisis. And that government has then seized on that crisis, which its own system of border controls has caused, to then implement this giant police state that used to be only on the border, but now is expanding nationwide under the logic of we've got to enforce this original dysfunctional border control system. You want to get rid of this weed? Pull it out by its root. Get rid of ICE, the border control, all restrictions on the free movements of goods, services, and people across borders. And now we're talking about harmony and morality and religion and free markets and fluidity. Again, let me do a promo on my book. It's a short book. It's an hour and a half read. That's the way I wanted it. The Case for Open Borders, a primer. You can buy it on Amazon, really cheap, $4 for the print version. I think it's $1 for the Kindle version.
If I could just, the government's pushback has included, it is somehow unpatriotic and un-American to resist or demonstrate against these law enforcement agents. That a law-abiding American just follows the law and doesn't interfere with these things. But what if there are unjust laws? What if there are unjust laws? The example I would use is the Dred Scott decision, that in the 1850s, through a decision of the Supreme Court, said that runaway slaves had to be returned to their masters, and that anyone who proceeded to assist them or prevent their recapture would be open to a jail time and a fine. Now, what if you believe that slavery was wrong? Should you have just passively watched as these bands of vigilantes and bounty hunters went about tracking down and reshackling slaves who had escaped to the northern states on their way to Canada, where slavery did not exist? Or should they have been willing to stand and speak out and object, and, to be honest, even hide runaway slaves? Now, all I'm saying is that sometimes the idea that just because a law is on the books does not make it just. And I know part of the responsibility, well, if you don't like the law, you go to the Congress and you try to change the law. That's true. But sometimes a law can be so egregious that it's necessary to speak your mind and demonstrate in ways that show that you consider it immoral, unjust, and un-American. And the people who are on the streets there, I'm not talking about those who are violently doing things. And in spite of Trump's and the conservatives' own rationales and agendas, there are people on the left who are professional agitators, and they want to create a crisis to force the government into imposing a fascist rule. So they could say, you see, we're right, and now we have to have armed resistance against it. Yes, the left has those actions. I don't care. I don't care. What I care about is that those who have the right thinking about freedom matters should not forget that there can be unjust laws, and guided by your conscience, it is not wrong to protest, speak out, or demonstrate your disagreement.
I completely agree. I'm really glad you've been. It's a profound point. But the way I look at it is any law that violates natural law or God's law is null and void, not worthy of respect. Look at segregation. People were right to violate segregation laws. And, I know we're about out of time or over time, but many years ago when I was practicing law on the border, my cousin and I did a Christmas show for illegal immigrants in the detention center there. And my cousin was a rock and roll singer. And so he was singing, and by pre-designed, he said he needed to rest his throat. And I got up and I talked to these guys. There was about, I don't know, 60 or 70 there in this detention center. They were in our audience. And I told them, I said, don't ever think for a moment that you're a criminal. I know you're in this jail here, but you're not a criminal. All you've done is follow God's laws. You're trying to support your family. You're trying to work. There's nothing wrong with that in a moral sense. The criminals are the federal judges, the federal prosecutors, and the federal agents who put you here, and the people who enacted this law that put you here. Those are the real criminals when you talk about natural law and God's laws. All right. On that note, Richard, we're out of time. We'll wrap things up. As always, enjoyed the conversation with you. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, thank you for your great support of FFF. Richard, look forward to talking to you next time.
Until next time.